But I would like to welcome you to a conversation with Judge W. Harold Albritton. First of all, I'd just like to recognize a few people here. First of all, we have Judge Albritton's former clerks right here. Would you please stand? I want to see you because I remember all of you. And thank you and welcome. And we also have Judge Albritton's family right here. I won't ask them to stand, but we can see where they are. But I would like to recognize just a few people also, aside from the family and the former clerks. First is Elna. You know, these windows up here are called the Elna windows. And I understand that Elna edited most of the stuff that came out of Judge Albritton's office. Is that right? And I consider that that's Elna's way of editing my conduct. So whenever I sit here and look up, I know that Elna is looking down upon me. The second thing is I, as a judge, you know, have issues, and I, of course, need a time when I can talk with my fellow judges. And we do talk among ourselves, and I will pick up the phone and call Judge Albritton and ask him about a certain legal issue. And really rarely he'll call me back and ask me about a legal issue. But if I want to get the correct answer, I call Lisa.
True.
Who is his permanent law clerk. And finally, you know, people talk about better halves and, you know, someone's better half. And I've always thought that was an ambiguous comment because that means the better half of what? You know, if you're starting out with, and you say someone's their better half, you may not be talking too much. But Harold is the best. I mean, I've spent 25 years on the bench with him. He is an incredible judge. You know, I always love to read what I call his gems of wisdom, gems of justice. And so what do you do when you have someone who is the best? And there's supposed to be someone who's his better half. Well, what would you call that person? Well, Jane, I hate to tell you, I'm going to break the rules of English. I know you were an English teacher, and I've decided you call them the bestest half. And Jane is truly the bestest half. She told me not to say anything about her and so forth, but I sorry, Jane, nothing I could do about it. But anyway, I also wanted to read a letter from Judge Watkins, who could not be here. And the letter is as follows. Harold, I am so sorry I can't be here today because of a long-standing prior commitment, but I expect to be your colleague for at least 25 more years. So maybe you don't miss me so much. To you and your family and your Chambers family, congratulations and hearty best wishes for a memorable weekend of fun and fellowship. When connection is deep, reflection need not be, because connection is right at the surface of everyday living. And upon reflection, every day I see down the hall a friend and colleague who is consistently judicious in his commitment to the law and culture, to persons of high and low estate alike, and especially to me, who arrived here 10 years ago as just another county seat lawyer. If I may loosely paraphrase Teddy Roosevelt, the first essential for a man's being a good man is his possession of universally respected virtues. And then he quotes, "No man can be a good man who is not a good husband and a good father, who is not honest in his dealings with other men and women, faithful to his friends, and fearless in the presence of his challenges, and who has not got a sound heart and sound mind." Teddy Roosevelt would have counted you a good man, one of the best, in fact. Now that I think about it, maybe you knew him. I think and that is in parentheses. He left me the option of reading that, and of course, I could not resist reading it. Nevertheless, as a husband and father, a friend and colleague, a judge and public servant, you are first and foremost an honorable man, a good man. We who have the pleasure to experience that are much richer for it. I personally thank you for sticking with me and the court family through thick and thin, good times and bad. We always count on your wisdom and steady hand and advice. So because you have added to our archives of good men and women working for the district just by being who you are, we honor you, your honor, on the 25th anniversary of your service to us and our great nation. Have a wonderful weekend of celebration. Your humble servant and chief. Chief. And with that, I will move on to the conversation. And I'd like to introduce the president of the Alabama State Bar, Lee Copeland.
Good afternoon. I'd gotten a call from Judge Thompson, and as he said, he just really wanted to chat as opposed to a speech with Judge Albritton, so I think we will just kind of commence chatting. Judge, when were you born?
Oh.
And how much did you weigh?
Well, I was born on December the 19th, 1936, and I don't remember how much I weighed.
We were talking to somebody who mentioned earlier about Andalusia, and as I understand, that your daddy was one of 10 or 11 siblings?
He was one of 11 children.
And then your mama was one of
9.
9. And you're the only child of that.
That's right.
You must have been a really bad baby that if they didn't want a couple.
I never asked.
And your daddy was a lawyer.
He was.
And when kind of your memories is 8, 9, 10 years old, about that time frame, what do you remember really about your daddy and kind of the law firm and him coming home and kind of what he did?
Well, he the law firm, when I was young like that, it was my father and 2 uncles and a contemporary of theirs named Albert Rankin. And I just remember as a child, Andalusia was a little town. It was about 9,000, maybe 10, and county seat of Covington County. He'd come home for lunch every day, except when he went to a Rotary Club on Tuesdays. And he'd come home and occasionally take a nap after lunch, and then go back. And I'd see him come and go. I'd see him working at home at night. And he had practiced with his father and his grandfather.
Firm was started in 1889, somewhere.
Started in 1887. My great-grandfather came down as a young man from North Carolina. His young wife had died, and he left 2 children with a maiden aunt in Washington, D.C., and he got his belongings that he could carry, which consisted of a little bit of clothes and his volumes of Shakespeare and his violin. And he got on a train, and he took off on the train heading south, not sure exactly where he was going to go. He ended up in stopping at the end of the line in Greenville, Alabama, and there was a circus there, and he was walking around and talking. He ran into another young lawyer who asked him where he was going. He told him his circumstances, and said he wasn't sure, but he just wanted to go to the end of nowhere. And Dempsey Powell, who later was a partner of his, said, "Well, you need to go to Andalusia." He said, that's the end of nowhere, and they need a lawyer down there. So he rented a horse and buggy, or bought one, and ended up in Andalusia and hung out a shingle. Ed T. Albritton, lawyer.
Right, and then, Judge, you went to high school in Andalusia?
Yeah, I went to high school through the 10th grade and then went to Marion Military Institute for my last 2 years in high school.
And how did you do in high school?
I did fine.
You know, we covered this before. We covered Judge Albritton like telling good things. You were there was nobody better. There's a name for that. What do they call it when you have the
I was valedictorian in
There
high
we
school
go.
class.
What was your kind of growing up as a teenager? You remember your first car, summer jobs?
I do remember my first car when I was 16, and it was an old Nash, kind of beat up, but it was a car and it ran, and it was a good thing to have. Yeah, I worked in the summers. When I was real little, I went to summer camps up in Tennessee in the summers, and then later was real involved with the Boy Scouts, but in the summers I had jobs. I worked at the Andalusia Star News, the weekly newspaper at the time. Now they are dailies.
This
But
is in high school?
yeah, this was in high school, and probably the 8th or 9th grade. Anyway, I worked there doing various things, and and then I also one summer worked at a flower shop and helping put things together. And another summer I worked in a Gulf Oil distributor's shop, a warehouse, stacking oil crates and other things, and also keeping an eye on whether any of the other gas stations went up or down on their prices. And if
So y'all could raise a lot.
well, lower, usually if somebody went down from 25 cents to 24 cents a gallon, then I had to do likewise.
In terms of, when you said a reporter for whom? Like the Andalusia
Yeah,
paper?
the Andalusia newspaper, they had me doing some, first started working on putting together obituaries. And then I worked some on the advertising. And I remember my first byline. I covered the annual meeting of the Alabama Electric Cooperative, and I wrote an article about that co-op meeting, and it had my byline on it. I remember one of the things from when I was working there was down, we used to call it the bottom. It was down at the bottom of a hill, and there was a cafe down there that was kind of, well, it wasn't the cleanest place you've ever seen. It was called Runt's Cafe.
Runts?
Runt's Cafe. And that's when I first started learning how to drink coffee. I'd go over there with the press people and drink coffee.
Did that kind of morph into whiskey as you got older? As the press people normally do? That would be a no, I take it.
I thought you were going to ask me when.
Yeah. Well, let's go on to college. You went to, surprise, surprise, Alabama, and why was that not a really surprise?
Well, it wasn't a surprise. My mother and father both went to the University of Alabama, and my grandfather went to the University of Alabama, so I fell right in line.
Were you in a fraternity there?
Yeah, I was an ATO.
And I remember what we talked about. How did you do in college?
I did all right.
You were ODK. I've got ODK and Jason's and vice president of the student. Is that all? Student body?
Yeah,
Is that all
that's
right?
true.
You
Yeah.
want to tell them a little bit about it, or it's just
Well, I
going
was
to be between us?
okay. Well, I was on the debate team my freshman year, and for a while on my sophomore year, but it got to be a little too much on top of everything else. My freshman year, I worked on the student newspaper for a little while because I actually was trying to make sure I wanted to go to law school, and I thought I might want to go into journalism, but I lost interest in that after a little while working on the Crimson White and stopped that.
Is that where you met Jane?
Yes, it is. And we met our first the first week we were at the University of Alabama as freshmen, and we were going through Rush. Jane had already gone through Rush and pledged Kappa Kappa Gamma, and I was in the middle of fraternity Rush, and we had a blind date going to a fraternity Rush party, and so I went by to pick her up, and I sure did like what I met.
Did she, at first blush, did she, you think?
I think so. At least she's always told me so.
Did y'all kind of meet, like, from that first, this is like the first week or so at the university?
Yeah, this was the first week. Yeah, well, that first semester we were there, we dated other people. But then after that, and I'm not sure they do this at colleges anymore. Anyway, we got pinned with my fraternity pin the second semester, and I well remember being taken down as a rite of passage and thrown in the fish pond in front of the Sigma New House.
Yeah.
And we've been together ever since. Be 58 years in June.
Right. And Judge, then from the university, is I understand from what we talked about, you kind of went, there was a deal you could go 3 years in the university and then straight on to law school.
That's right. You could go 3 years in undergraduate school if you took included prescribed courses in it, and then you could go to law school. And after your first semester in law school, you got your undergraduate degree.
Right.
And then your law degree after you finish that.
I know that you said your granddaddy and your daddy were lawyers. Why did you really want to be a lawyer? Was there some moment that you knew?
Well, I grew up in a lawyer family with my father and two uncles being a lawyer, and I was never pushed to go to law school. I just grew up knowing what, kind of feeling like that's what you did, you know. And so I remember a time back when my father was working real hard at night with stuff spread out all over the dining room table where he was working, coming in at night, and books and papers and all stacked all over. And finally, I was pretty young then. Finally, I asked him what he was doing, and he said, "Well, he was working on a case that he'd been appointed to represent a man, that the judge had appointed him to represent a man who had chased his wife around the house 3 times and shot her with a shotgun and killed her." And I said, "Well, why are you representing him?" And he said, "Well, I was appointed by the judge to do that." And I said, "Well, you work in the office in the day, and every night I see you here and all. Why are you working so hard for this person?" And he just said, "Because I'm a lawyer." Well, that meant a lot to me, and it still does.
So that was kind of your Atticus Finch type.
Yeah, I would say so.
How did you do in law school?
I did all right.
There we go. Let me try to get it this way. What is the class that you like the best?
I like torts the best.
Okay. That's a setup for this question. What is the class you like the least?
I want everybody to know that I've learned a lot more about this subject than I did when I took the final exam in agency, and I made a C in agency, and that's the only time I did that. But and I've learned a lot about it since. I assure you.
And who was your teacher?
Professor Cohen.
Glad to see that you don't bear a grudge after all these years on that. And then, as I understand it, that like high school, like college, where you're ODK and Jason's, you were number 2 in your class at Alabama.
That's true.
But for the C, you'd be number 1.
Yeah, Professor Cohen.
So were you and Jane married while you were in school?
Yes, we were, and Jane went through. We got married while I was a freshman, and after we got married in June after I had started law school, and right after we got married, I went off to Fort Benning to 6 weeks ROTC summer camp, and she went back to stay with her mother. And then we started out in student housing at the University of Alabama, and she graduated and had a teaching certificate, and she taught school and helped send me through law school.
Where do you remember the name where she taught?
She taught at Brookwood High School, which was out in the county.
And taught English, is that right?
Well, she taught English, but also taught another. But she taught another class too, and that was right after we'd gotten married in June. She started teaching the following year, and this was in a section of the county where they had a lot of people who took a long time to get through school, and she had a lot of great big boys in her classes, and they assigned her to teach marriage and family relations. So that's the most memorable class that she taught to me.
I guess you're saying that they may have known more than these old students.
She wondered about that.
Yeah. And then, Judge, so you graduated, but before you kind of can begin your private practice, you went in the military.
Right. When I had an Army Infantry commission through ROTC, and then I was deferred through at that time we had the draft, and was deferred through law school, and then branch transferred into the Judge Advocate General Corps. We had our oldest son, Hal, while we were in law school, and he was a baby, and we went to Huntsville to.
Let me hold back. Let me go back. So, like your senior year, you were married, but Hal had been born, right?
He was born in March, and I graduated in August that summer.
Okay, go ahead.
So we took him with us and went into the Army, and went to Judge Advocate General School at the University of Virginia for 3 months, and then headed out to the middle of Texas, to Fort Hood, Texas, and were there for a year and a half. Yeah, could be. They had blue northers that blew in and dropped them quickly. And our second son, Ben, was born while we were in the Army.
What type of legal work did you do?
We were with the post Judge Advocate General's office, and didn't have too many lawyers in that, but the two younger ones, we both graduated from Jag at school at the same time. Got out there, and they would have us doing general courts martial, and one of us would prosecute for 6 months while the other one defended for 6 months, and then we'd swap sides. So we got in a lot of trial experience.
Right.
Also did some office work, counseling with soldiers who came in for various things, wills or other things.
You remember any particular cases?
I remember one in particular because it was, if not the first, it was one of the very first I tried out there, and I was assigned to be the defense counsel, and they had my client was in the stockade, and he was charged with desertion, which is a serious offense in the military. I went and talked with him and found out he'd been there in the stockade for 11 months and had just been charged. So having just come out of law school and just come out of JAG school, I said, aha, he hadn't been given a speedy trial. Well, the military didn't have a Speedy Trial Act as such, but they had, but the Constitution still prevailed and even applied to the military. So I filed a motion to dismiss for failure to give him a speedy trial.
That made you popular with the prosecution.
It made me real popular with my superiors in the office. So I anyway, we went over and argued that, and I'd researched it and had a lot of case law and whatever. And the military judge granted the motion and dismissed all charges against my client and told him he could go by and pick up his things and go to a barracks. And I sat down with him before we left, and I had a long talk with him. And I said, now you things like, you've been given a second chance in life. This is can wipe out everything that's been happening in the past and give you a good chance to straighten up and have a good life in the future. And he said, yes, sir, that's what I'm going to do. So I came home that night, and I saw Jane, and I said, I have just gotten a person who was guilty off because they didn't give him a speedy trial. It was on a technicality. But I had a long talk with him, and I can feel good about this tonight because he's got a new start on life, and he's going to straighten up and make something of himself. So I came in the next morning, and one of my superiors met me at the door, and he said, well, Lieutenant Albritton, have you heard about your client? And I said, no, sir, I haven't. And he said, well, seems that he went back to the barracks, and he told everybody there that he had a sharp lawyer who'd just gotten him off for murder, and said he was bragging about it. And then everybody left, go to the chow hall for supper. He stayed behind. When they got back, he'd cleaned out lockers all over the place, stolen half the stuff in the barracks, and was gone. So, I don't know, that was my first taste of kind of disillusioning for a young lawyer.
Oh, so how long did you do the Jag Corps before you were cleared up again?
I was in for 2 years, and then came back to Andalusia and into the family law firm there.
And did you judge there were right before? I mean, you're about to come. Your time is up. Did you think about going someplace other than Andalusia?
I had an opportunity to go to Birmingham with a major firm there, but Jane and I thought about it and talked about it a lot. And
Jane was from where originally?
She was from Tuscumbia,
right,
up at the north end of the state, and I was from the south end of the state. And we talked about it a lot. I had an opportunity to go with a large law firm. It was too big for me. I didn't want to practice with a huge firm, and it was too huge. It was the biggest in the state. They had 40 lawyers, and that was far too many for me to want to practice with. So had an offer of $450 a month there, but we came back to Andalusia for $400 a month.
So your daddy did pays you pretty good on that scale. Did you negotiate with him on that $400?
No, I didn't. I just took what was offered.
Tell us, so you come back, 2 children now?
Right.
2 children. You come back, did y'all immediately get a house?
We rented a house for a while, but my mother and father had a little house. It had 1 bedroom in it. It was one that they had lived in when they first were married and first back living in Andalusia. And it had been a rental house, and they gave us that house as a wedding present. It had gotten in bad shape. And so we rented and then added on to the house and moved in next year.
And then, so you start. And when you started, tell us just a little bit, how many, for those that, he said this earlier, was 1 circuit lawyer, that was 1 judge, the circuit being one county, as opposed to a judge having, 2 or 3 counties. So there was 1 circuit judge,
At that
1
time, there
probate
was
judge.
1 circuit
right.
judge, yeah.
And how many lawyers in Covington County?
Maybe 30.
Yeah. Did you know,
25, 30.
yeah, did you kind of, even though you just moved there, did you kind of know most the lawyers, or at least their names or families?
I knew most of them. There were some who'd been there, and some were practicing with their father and that type thing.
And what part of then I think there was your daddy, your uncle, Mr. Rankin, and did you have another uncle at that time?
Two uncles.
Two uncles. And what kind of area did you start out in?
The idea when I came back was that they wanted me to underpin my uncle, who was a transactional lawyer and one of the early tax practitioners in the state. And the firm, there were 5 members of the firm, I was the 5th one, and they had a practice all over that part of the state in northwest Florida. They had clients who had been clients of their father and their grandfather, and still were clients, and some turned out to be later clients of mine. So, and the major industry there in Andalusia was a shirt factory called Alitex. They had plants in 5 cities, and the firm represented them, and one of my uncles was on the general counsel for them, and my father was on the board of directors. So I was expecting to work with them a lot, and I did start working under my uncle with a lot of transactional and tax work, but I started doing some trial work also, and I really liked the trial work.
Did not like the transactional work.
I wasn't cut out for being that. My uncle told me, he said, you have to understand, you have to get your mind right on practicing tax law. It's not really law, it's higher metaphysics. And so, so anyway, I never did get there.
Did you was there any uncle, were you closer to one uncle than the other?
Well, I was close to both of them, but I guess I was particularly closer to my uncle Bill Albritton because I was named for him. His name was William Harold Jr., and my parents named me William Harold III. He named his son after my father, Robert Bynum Albritton.
Right.
Confused people and still does.
Does, when you first started working with your daddy, was it kind of as you envisioned it? Was it harder? Was it easier? Or was it just very natural?
Well, it got along fine. I'd been practicing law a little bit, so in the military, so I knew kind of what it was, and I'd been around my uncles and my father and Mr. Rankin a lot, so I kind of just fit right in.
And how far was, just so I can get a frame of reference, your office was on the square?
It was right off the square. It was a block off the square. Andalusia is the county seat. It has a square down there and has a big, pretty courthouse. The courthouse was designed by the same architect that did our old building, the old courthouse here in Montgomery, that we're attached to.
The federal courthouse.
Federal courthouse, yeah. The firm had been in a building that's the skyscraper in Andalusia. I think it's 6 floors or 6 or 7 floors, and had an elevator in it. And the firm had been there for years, but they had built a new building right off the square, and I came back just after they moved into that building.
And how far was your home where you and Jane were living?
About a couple of miles. I'd come home for lunch every day,
Like
and,
your dad,
except going to Rotary Club on Tuesdays.
Do you remember your first kind of case, not corporate case, I'm talking about where you got a client, courtroom type case?
I remember it well because I lost it. It was, back then in law practice, I guess all over, young lawyers cut their teeth on trying slip and fall cases and whiplash injury cases and car wrecks. And the firm turned over to me a case where a person had slipped and fallen in a store there.
As on the defense
and
side.
Lucia, yeah, to defend.
I mean, y'all primarily, let me interrupt you.
Yeah.
So y'all primarily did defense work.
Mostly, some plaintiffs, but
Go
more or
ahead.
less defense work. So I went over and tried that case. And at that time, you didn't take 100 depositions and go through all this. You pretty much, if the injuries weren't just gigantic, you talked about the cases and went over and tried the cases.
This would be the file.
Yeah, that's right. But anyway, I went over and tried that case and thought I had it made. Jury came back for the plaintiff. I came back to the office with my tail tucked between my legs, and they said, "How'd you do?" And I said, "Well, I lost." And they said, "Well, I'm sorry." And I said, "Yeah, they gave the plaintiff $1,500." And they said, "Good gosh, son, that that was a win.
Yeah.
you should be happy about that, holding the verdict down to that." And I said, "Well, I wasn't happy about it, and I'm still not."
One of the things that when you were talking about moving your law practice, I know just from our prior conversation, who had in the county, who had the law library? Did the county have a law library?
County had a few books there, but we had, of course, you understand back then you didn't have electronic
Right.
research and all of that. So we did, our firm had always done a lot of corporate work and represented existing corporations and forming new corporations and all kind of things like that. So they'd always felt like having a law library was essential, and we had a big library with it, and spent a lot of money on keeping up a big law library.
Yeah, and that was an expense.
It was a big expense.
Would y'all open it up? Was Albritton Library kind of the county's law library?
We would happy for any of the other lawyers to come over and use books, and they did from time to time.
Yeah. Talk, because it's changed so much a little bit as your practice grew. First talk about the trial terms in, say, Covington County, and then I think we'll talk about how your practice grew like that. Like there'd be a trial term twice a year, 4 times?
Well, I think when we started off, we had trial terms in Covington County 3 times a year for a week or 2. And then the other counties that we practiced in down there were the same. Sometimes they just have 2 a year. But when I first came into practice, it was real different. They showed me my office. They told me who my secretary was. I had just brand new, but I had my own secretary. They gave me a Dictaphone machine, which at that time had a thin, wide plastic belt that you slipped over a thing here, and you talked into the microphone, and it made grooves, and then you would take it out and give it to your secretary. And
I don't think they've seen it.
no, I haven't seen one in a while. Later on, we moved up to sliding in a disc or a cartridge, I believe it was. Anyway, we kept on doing that, but we didn't have any computers or anything like that. I remember the first fax machine that we got. My uncle, who did the tax and transactional work, was working on a matter with a big firm in Chicago, and it was kind of a major thing. And he came in and told the rest of us that he said, "They've got a thing now that will really help us. It's a machine that goes through the telephone wires, and it's called a facsimile machine. And you can do a document and put it on this thing and send it to somebody, and they have it, and you can actually make changes and look at them and send it." And so we got a fax machine, and he was thrilled with it because they could he would get their version of it, and he'd redline it and change it around, and then he'd put it, or his secretary would put it, he hardly knew how to use a telephone, but his secretary would put it in the fax machine and send it up there, and they'd get it, and then they'd do some marking up, and they'd send it back, and it was a marvel. And I think we were the first, I'm sure we were the first law firm that had a fax machine. We were one of the few people in town, I think, right then that had one.
How did y'all set your fees?
Fee setting then was really different from the way it turned out later. One thing we had, the County Bar Association had a little fee schedule that told you how much to charge for a deed, how much to charge for a simple will, how much to charge for these various things, and everybody just went by the fee schedule. It later was determined, probably by some federal judge, that was not legal to set fees like that. So we did away with that. But I remember when I was practicing law when the billable hour first came into prominence. And I remember that very well. Back there was a fellow named Morgan from Texas. He was a lawyer from Texas. And he had written an article, and he was giving talks with bar associations all over the country, and was really involved with the American Bar Association. And the name of the article and the name of his talks was Waltzing Fees into the 20th Century. And what he was talking about was, he said, lawyers are selling all they have to sell so cheaply that they're really not making an adequate amount. And the thing was, he said, if you keep up with the number of hours that you're working on a matter, and look at what you've charged, you'll realize that you're making less an hour that many other people that's out running shops and things are making. And he was urging lawyers to keep up with their time and to set a rate for the time and to generally base fees, except for plaintiffs' personal injury cases and other cases like that, based on a schedule like that. So people started keeping billable hours and arriving at a billable rate, and it did turn out that this was not looked on, and I don't look at it now as being unfair to clients. It was being fair to yourselves and fair to the clients. And then it moved from that into where clients were expecting that and then wanting you to itemize. And I remember when that first started, you itemized what you did and how much time that was and what your billable rate was, and you negotiated all like that, except for my uncle, who was the tax practitioner. And he refused to do it. He said, I'm not about to do that. I'm charged reasonable fees. And he said, and so he would continue all of his practice. When he'd get through with the matter, he'd send out for services rendered, so much. And we tried to persuade him that he was charging much too little, and he really was. And he started having a couple of clients kick about it because they weren't getting a breakdown. And he told them that, he said, look, if you don't trust me enough to know that what I'm billing you for is a reasonable charge, then you need to go to another lawyer. And we had one client that was a pretty good client that took him up on it. But that didn't change his way of billing. You know, at that same time, on the plaintiff's side, I remember then that Melvin Belli was a lawyer back then, was giving lectures and writing books and everything about the adequate award. And he was in the forefront of saying that verdicts are too low because you're just talking to jurors and you're not using demonstrative evidence. He was in the forefront of the use of demonstrative evidence. When you show people something, it means a lot more than when you just tell them about it. And it did have the effect of increasing fees and of course, increasing verdicts, and plaintiffs' lawyers at that time were charging contingent fees just as now.
What was in your kind of heyday of your practice? We've got that as kind of defense work, but what type of defense work?
Well, I want to tell about one kind of early in my trial practice, fairly early in it, a case that I really always remember, and it's it's something that was real special. There was a case over I practiced in all the counties around, and there was a case over in Ozark that was a will contest, and a second wife was the beneficiary under a will, and the children from the first wife were were contesting the will. It had been tried once over there, and it had been a verdict for the plaintiffs, and the will was set aside, but it was appealed, and the Supreme Court of Alabama reversed it, sent it back for a new trial, and the lawyer for the second wife to uphold the will, the lawyer died. So she came over and talked to my father about the case, and he asked me to take it over. And I had tried some cases, but not a lot. So he sent me over to Ozark to try this case. I was kind of intimidated about it because the lawyer on the other side was from Montgomery, and I didn't know him personally, but I know he had a reputation for being a top-notch trial lawyer. And I went over there and we tried the case, and for about 3 days. And anyway, the jury came back and came back in favor of the defendant and upheld the will. That would be me. And that was good, but that's not what the most memorable thing about it is. The most memorable thing happened the next morning when the mail came, and I had a note sent from Montgomery, and I opened it in the morning mail. I opened it, and it said, "Dear Harold, congratulations on your win in the case in Ozark. It was a hard-fought trial. You're going to be a very fine trial lawyer. Congratulations. With warmest regards, Albert Copeland." That was your daddy. And I tell you, that was an example of professionalism that I remember much more than the details of the trial. And it was a beautiful thing to happen. That he was a top-notch lawyer.
Did you ever try any criminal cases? I mean, were you ever appointed in any criminal case? Ever tried any criminal cases?
Yeah, I very few, mostly by appointment. I had one that was a business client of ours who was a pharmacist, owned a drugstore, and this was a bizarre case. He was sued by another pharmacist who claimed he tried to ruin his practice by slipping poison into a prescription and sending it by UPS. And anyway, a long story, but anyway, the civil case was tried over in Elba, and I represented him because he was a corporate client, and his insurance company was also in the case, and we tried it for a good long time, and it ended up with a hung jury. And after that, the insurance company insisted on settling the case, and we objected to their settlement because he said it would hurt him, and he didn't want it. But they settled it anyway, and he didn't have any way to stop them. So then he was indicted, and so I defended him in that, and I had not done a lot of trial work, so I had Maury Smith from here in Montgomery was kind of behind the scenes helping me with things, yeah, on the telephone and all, but not there. Paul Harvey some people will remember Paul Harvey and some won't, but he had a news broadcast every day that was very popular on the radio, and he had one where he mentioned, he said, this druggist is charged going to be tried for putting poison in a child's prescription, and about how horrible it was. So anyway, we tried the case, and at the end of it, I thought we were going to win the case, and by the end of it, I asked the jury that I said, this man's reputation needs to be cleared, and the quickest you come out of that jury room, the quickest, the best it'll be for his reputation. And I'm going to ask you to get a foreman, turn around, and come back. And they did. They came back. It took them about less than 10 minutes to come back out and find him not guilty.
Good night.
So I sent a letter to Paul Harvey. I'd had him down for to speak to the Chamber of Commerce at the annual meeting about a year before. Not that we were friends, but I just felt okay to write him. And I did, and he had a thing that back then that he called The Rest of the Story, and wrote a book called that too, and that was one story, but then this is the way it ended. And I told him how that one ended, and I said, you owe it to him to say that. So he came on the radio and he reported on that. So that made me feel good.
What was the case that I assume you traveled a bunch? I know you did in-state kind of defending cases. What about out of state?
I didn't try cases out of state. I went around the country a lot on depositions and all this sort of thing, but
where's the furthest you went?
Well, I went to a lot of states. I guess probably the most time I spent away from somewhere would have been in California. I got involved in a case in the movie industry out there that was a real interesting case.
What was that about?
Hal was back in law practice, my oldest son, back in law practice with me then, and he helped me a lot on this one. But yeah, the corporation that had been Republic Pictures that used to make the Gene Autry and Roy Rogers movies and those kind of things, had done some work with a local group from Covington County that that had put together and were producing and putting out a movie. And the movie had been a very popular movie back then of Clint Eastwood called The Outlaw Josie Wales, and most people have heard of that. Well, this was a movie that some local people put together called The Return of Josie Wales. And
in Andalusia.
Red Level, actually. Right next door to Andalusia. But anyway, they this company from out there in California filed a suit against them for about $10,000, I think, for some work they had done and hadn't gotten paid, and they filed it in Mobile. And so the defendants, local defendants there in Covington County, got a change of venue to Covington County and countersued for $10 million for keeping them from making any money on the show, and they claimed that they had held it up from getting into previews and all over this fuss over $10,000. Well, anyway, the company called me and asked me to take over the case up there in Covington County, and I did, and we had it was quite interesting. We spent several trips out to California and taking depositions and doing other things, and I was shown through all the techniques of making movies and enjoyed that. And
what happened with the verdict?
Well, we got back, and it tried for about a week and a half, and their theory was that if it had gotten into previews, they would have been able to get it out earlier and make a lot of money on it because it was this great movie. But that we held them up for getting in this by fussing over this $10,000. So toward the end of the case, I had made arrangements with the one movie theater in Andalusia. It's right next door to the courthouse, and I'd made arrangements with the people over there to let us show the movie if the judge would allow it. So I stood up and said, Your Honor, we've got one other thing we'd like to submit, and that's the movie. And we'd like to adjourn to the Martin Theater to see the return of Josie Wales, and his their lawyers objected. They said, we've been
This
here.
was going to be the $10 million movie.
We've been here a week and a half, and everybody's tired, and everybody knows all about the facts of this case, and it's irrelevant as to seeing the movie. I said, Judge, the whole thing is about this movie. I think the jury ought to be able to see it. He said, well, I think so too. So we went over, traipsed over next door to the movie theater, and saw the movie, and it really was a bomb. Yeah, but we came back, and anyway, the jury was out for a long time. So I didn't win that one. They ruled. I tried to keep away from that $10,000 we were claiming, but they found against us on that we weren't entitled to that. The held for the plaintiff, the co-plaintiffs, counter plaintiffs for something like $75,000 or $100,000, something.
That's like the $1,500.
It's kind of like that $1,500, yeah.
Yeah.
But back in talking about technology, like we were talking about a little earlier, we didn't have. I remember when computers first came into being, and we got the first thing that was a huge thing. I think it was called an MTST machine or something like that. It had cards you put in it with little dots that you could make forms with, and we got that, and the secretaries went berserk and mad at us and all, and they didn't like it, and we didn't know what to do with it. So it wasn't much use. But we had I was active in the state bar, and we had a lawyer come down. A person come down to give a talk at the Covington County Bar Association about technology, and about he was in charge of professional responsibility. And he came down, and I remember one of the things he said that just made everybody think he was crazy. He said, I'm going to tell you, in 5 years, every lawyer in this room is going to have a computer on your desk, and every lawyer in this room is going to have access to court opinions immediately that you'll be able to research, and you will not be able to wait until you get the advance sheets 2 months later or whatever on the law. If something happened the day before and you didn't pick it up, you're going to be subject to being sued for not knowing of this development in the law. And everybody scoffed at that. Well, my son Hal, who was practicing with me then, got a computer and had a computer on his desk and was using it, but I'd started getting put out about one thing, thinking he was wasting time, and and finally I got to him and I said, son, you're taking up too much time. We've got experienced, really valuable secretaries here.
He was typing his own stuff.
Who do the typing, and
Yeah.
what you do is you pick up the microphone and you type, you dictate into it, and then you give the thing to your secretary, and she types it up, and you get it back, and you take a red pencil, and you change things around and all, and then you give it back, let her do that work while you're doing. He said, I can do this. I couldn't type. I never knew how to type, but he did. He said, I can do this a lot faster than I can do what you're talking about. And I said, well, okay, you go ahead. And so he did. And but I don't think anybody else in the firm ever started doing that until
I heard that one of your clerks, like you'd been here for 2 years, they gave you a dust cover for your computer because it wasn't exactly used a bunch. I don't know if that's really true or not.
Well, that is true. In fact, after about in fact, Elna has the proof of it. She started the Scrapbook for me back when Elna came with me when I came here. She was, and I think she worked for your daddy. It was the first job. But she came here with me when I came here, because I was looking for a secretary who knew lawyers instead of somebody who had worked with a judge, and she had worked with lawyers for a long time. And So she's been with me ever since, but she started a scrapbook, and she's got a picture in there of me sitting there with a dust cover in the background on my computer. But I use it now, somewhat.
Well, before today, I was, you were texting your one grandchild, or trying to text.
Yep, I was, and in fact, she has come in now. I think I told everybody that they were stuck behind a wreck on I-65.
You know, Judge, what's a little funny, not being, I know, getting pointed to the federal bench, but with all of those Albrittons in Andalusia, all of your daddy's 10 relatives, or maybe 10 brothers and sisters, granddaddy, your daddy, your uncles, did you ever think about running as like for a state court judge, or did any of the Albrittons think about running for a state court judge?
No, no, never did do that. I enjoyed being a lawyer too much to do that, and I was for 30 years before this opportunity came, which has been a wonderful thing for me. It came at a good time with an empty nest. My sons were one married and two in, they were all away and in school and what have you.
Well, when you were talking about that technology, how did you, for your briefs, would you dictate your briefs? Would you handwrite them?
I usually used a legal pad and scratched out things on that, and then I'd pick up the dictaphone, the microphone, and dictate it and then get it back.
Transcribe. What about opening statements, closing arguments?
Opening statements and closing argument, I didn't write out word for word, but I would think long and hard about them. I'd make notes and general ideas, and I'd usually try those out on my my sounding board, and the person who was my everyman was Jane, and when I'd come home, I'd try out an opening statement or a closing argument generally on her, and she would tell me what worked and what didn't work, and she was a valuable asset.
That's beautiful. Isn't it funny, though? I mean, I do the same, but isn't it funny, the things you think is going to work the best don't really pass the test?
That's right, and there would be things that she said. I wouldn't say that.
Yeah. Judge, we were, before the break, we were talking about going over your closing and opening with your wife. Did you talk with your kids much about your cases when you went home? I'm not talking about confidences. I'm just talking about.
Yeah, generally about what I was doing and that sort of thing. Yeah, I remember one time I was telling you about that at the table at supper. That was another thing back then. In Andalusia we had breakfast at the table and supper at the table together and all. I came home and we were sitting there at the supper table, and I said, well, I got a new case in today. It's a bad case. A man over in Evergreen got his arm, lost his arm in a meat grinder, and son Tom, who was kind of young at the time anyway, he spoke up and said, I know, we're for the meat grinder.
It's all that. It's all that defense work, I'm telling you. Did you ever have any kind of plaintiff's cases?
Yeah, and I had some. I had one that was particularly a lot of fun. It was not too long before I left practice and came here, and that was I had a bad faith case, a jury case against an insurance company in Andalusia, and got $1.5 million verdict. So for me, that was a lot of fun.
You had that contingent fee.
Yeah.
What other cases can you recall?
I have a real good memory of the last case I tried. Last case, I did most all of the federal practice for our firm, and I was involved in a lot of pharmaceutical cases. This was not the last case I tried, but early on I got involved with representing a pharmaceutical company, the Upjohn Company, and now part of one of the others. But it was in the early days of products liability, and a lawsuit had been filed involving a drug and a serious injury in Andalusia, and they called me from Kalamazoo, Michigan, and wanted me to represent them, and I did, and we removed the case up here and tried the case and got a defense verdict. So that at that time, the general counsel with the company was the only one that even did any trial work. The rest of it was work in Washington and all, and so products liability work was kind of new. So then it got to where it wasn't so new, and they were involved in a number of cases, and it turned out he had me representing them all over the state, and that was interesting work. But the last case that I tried, and don't want to run out too much time, but the last case that I tried was here in federal court, and it was under Judge Thompson. He was the judge, and
how'd he do?
He did great. Seriously, my clients even talked about that, but it was a case where I represented a company out of Grove, Iowa, who manufactured model airplanes and model airplane fuel and a lot of this, and they were sued by an Alabama company that was a small company that they claimed that my client had stolen their formula for model airplane fuel and a lot of other things. Anyway, they were suing for a lot of money for various theories, and we tried that case for about a week and a half.
Oh.
And we had in the hotel downtown. Now it's the DoubleTree. Now it was the Madison or something back then.
Yeah.
We had a war room set up in between two bedrooms, and we had people coming down. We had the experts and everybody else coming down, and that's the war room is where we would go to strategize and to relax with a cup of coffee or something in the afternoon, and talk to witnesses and get prepared for the next day. So they brought down some snacks for the war room, and what they brought was a whole bunch of bags of corn nuts, which I wasn't familiar with, but is a big thing in the Midwest. So they brought corn nuts, and I brought big packages of boiled peanuts. So we had boiled peanuts and corn nuts. But anyway, we tried the case, and serious Judge Thompson, it was a pleasure to try the case under him. I didn't win all my points or anything, but we had a lawyer from Nebraska who was down, personal lawyers for them, that was kind of second chair, and he said he'd never tried a case, seen a case tried before a finer judge than Judge Thompson, and I agreed with that. And we...
I take it you won.
I won the case, and that...
Okay, if he'd gotten killed, I'm not so sure that's... Yeah. I mean, I'm not saying, but just real quick, Judge, we've probably got time. There are a couple of points I want to get across, but I want to hear one more story before I get into just Trey. Just humor me, give me just a little bit longer. Just because I know the answer, were you ever sued?
Well, the answer is no, but that requires an asterisk. We represented one of the banks in Andalusia, and this was a real hard time in my practice. It was right toward the end of the practice. My uncle had been on the board of directors of that bank, and he died, and I took his place, and I'd been on the board of directors for 2 or 3 years when it turned out that we had a rogue loan officer who had made a huge amount of loans during a big thing of building condominiums and stuff down on the coast that ended up going bust. And when they went under, it turned out that there were a lot of fraudulent loans, bad papers, nothing to back them up and everything, and the bank was taken over by the state, and ended up that First Alabama Bank at that time, now Regions Bank, ended up buying from the state. But anyway, I was on the board of directors, and I'd been when that happened, and I'd also been asked to stay on as one of three by First Alabama Regions Bank to continue on the board and work with them. But anyway, a stockholder suit was filed against the board of directors, and on behalf of all stockholders and everything, and they sued every director except me, and the lawyer who filed the suit.
This is right when you've been named as the nominee for the bench.
No, it wasn't when I'd been named, but I was one of the ones who was being considered. Anyway, the plaintiff's lawyer didn't want to sue me because of professional courtesy, and so that was real awkward for me to be sitting there like I was without being. So I filed a motion to intervene as a defendant in the case. And I went home
That's a first now, you realize that.
And I went home that night and I told Jane what I had done, and she said, "You what?" So anyway, but I felt strongly and still do that I was on the board just like everybody else, and should be. Anyway, it was pending on my motion to intervene as a defendant when I started being interviewed and going through these kind of things. And Charlie Stakely represented the board in the case, top-notch trial lawyer, and we were very happy to have him representing us, or them. I wasn't in the case yet. But so anyway.
Did you ever make it in?
No, it ended up, and this was before I went up for the interviews, shortly before, that the judge denied my motion to intervene on the grounds that the plaintiff had a right to sue whoever they wanted to sue. And,
imagine that.
So that I couldn't force myself into the case. So anyway, then I went up for interviews in Washington, and I was asked the question you asked if I'd ever been sued. So I told them what had happened, and they said about what Jane said. You what? But anyway, I was open about it and told them about it. It obviously it didn't hurt.
Judge, I know that that you were active. You mentioned that you were president of the bar, and I know that you were active in the bar. What about in Andalusia, in the community?
Well, most lawyers, as most lawyers are now, I think, were involved in civic matters, and so I got real involved I was in the Rotary Club, president of the Rotary Club. I was president of the Chamber of Commerce, and
Your church?
Yeah, I was in church and was an officer in there, and I was on the board of directors of a local hospital and a lot of things like that.
Boy Scouts?
Yeah, well, I wasn't too involved with the Boy Scouts after I was involved with the Cub Scouts a lot as my children were coming up. By the time they were in the Boy Scouts, I couldn't be a troop leader because I'd gotten really too involved in my law practice to do that. But I was an Eagle Scout when I was back as a kid, and two of my three sons were Eagles. My oldest son, Hal, was active in the Boy Scouts and got to be a Life Scout, which is just under Eagle when what they say, the saying is the fumes got him. He was, that was perfume and gas fumes. And and his interest took a different direction.
Judge, I think that's about it. Unless you had something you wanted to comment on, chat about.
No, this has been a real pleasure. I could keep doing this for a long
Well, I'm
time, but
happy
there's no point in keeping everybody here. But anyway, those were a few fun war stories to tell, and appreciate you taking your time. I know Lee was speaking down in Orange Beach today as president of the state bar, drove up for this, so thank you.
Thanks. Judge, just one point of personal privilege. I am, as we speak, president of the bar, about to go out, but the bar's motto is, most of y'all, I don't know that most of y'all are Alabama lawyers, but a good chunk of you are, is lawyers render service. And that's kind of what we do. And if ever there was a person to me that shows what that statement means, is Judge Albritton. You know, the lawyers get out of whack, and frankly, judges get out of whack sometimes.
Why are you pointing at me?
I'm not. when the world goes wrong, if lawyers remember that we are servant leaders, and what we do, we serve the law, and it's not vice versa. The law doesn't exist, so we have an occupation. We exist, in my mind, so we can serve the law. And if ever, as I said, there's a fella that represents that kind of servant leader, it's Judge Albritton. And just as a lawyer, I just think it's terribly important when Judge Albritton, this is not on my list, I mean, it's on my list, I didn't get to it, I'm so sorry. He talked about the pro bono work that he did. The truth is, us as lawyers, we should never, ever have a millisecond where we don't have a pro bono case in our office. And I'm not talking about your cousin's third something that's not going to pay you. I'm talking about not something that you have a responsibility, but something you have a duty for. And it's almost as if our motto of lawyers render service was written for Judge Albritton.
Thank you.